Welcome to First Christian Church's Adult Fellowship Bible Study. We continue with our in-depth study of the book of Acts in the New Testament. We have just completed a 4-lesson series in chapter 9 of Acts related to Paul's conversion and commissioning. However, there is still more in chapter 9 than just that story, and we'll finish the rest of chapter 9 today. Even though Paul is dropped from the storyline at this point, Luke will pick him up later, and he'll actually become the dominant part of the book here just a little later. Today's lessons involve Peter and two miracle stories that are here, while he's operating in this area where Philip had been, along the Mediterranean coast, in an area of a Palestinian valley, or right in the edge of the Palestinian valley, and in the Samarian area of what would have been old Israel. So we'll read Acts 9, starting in verse 32, and go to the end of the chapter in the New Revised Standard Version. Now as Peter went here and there among all the believers, he came down also to a saint living in Lydda. There he found a man named Aeneas, who had been bedridden for 8 years, for he was paralyzed. Peter said to him, Aeneas, Jesus Christ heals you. Get up and make your bed. And immediately he got up, and all the residents of Lydia and Sharon saw him and turned to the Lord. Now in Joppa there was a disciple whose name was Tabitha, which in Greek is Dorcas. She was devoted to good works and acts of charity. At that time she became ill and died. When they had washed her, they laid her in a room upstairs. Since Lydda was near Joppa, the disciples, who heard that Peter was there, sent 2 men to him with the request, Please come to us without delay. So Peter got up and went with them, and when he arrived, they took him to the room upstairs. All the widows stood beside him, weeping and showing tunics and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was with them. Peter put all of them outside, and then he knelt down and prayed. He turned to the body and said, Tabitha, get up. Then she opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He gave her his hand and helped her up. Then calling the saints and widows, he showed her to be alive. This became known throughout Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. Meanwhile, he stayed in Joppa for some time with a certain Simon, a tanner. Scholars generally note that Luke just suddenly turns to Peter's ministry here in a very abrupt style, and without any continuity whatsoever to the story flow. He leaves it to the reader to make these context ties, note scholars. The area Peter is operating in is, for these stories, it's not Jerusalem, where Peter has been doing his ministry, but the same region where Philip conducted his ministry that we studied back there in chapter 8. Recall from chapter 8 that Luke claimed that Philip preached to all the towns between Azotus and Caesarea, and in Lydda, the plain of Sharon is this general area. It's an area about 30 miles long valley, near adjacent to the Mediterranean coast. It's on the Caesarea south to Joppa, then on south to Egypt route. This is the is old Samaritan land. If you look back in the Old Testament, today this area of Israel is the area that's referred would be very close to the big airport, famous airport, Ben Gurion International Airport there. This was Israelite, not Jewish land originally in the Old Testament. But after the Assyrians conquered the northern 10 tribes, a number of Benjaminites, the other major tribe of the Jews, moved into this area, along with a lot of Gentiles that were added. At the time of Peter, it had also not only the Benjamite Jews, but Judean Jews in this area, and some Hellenistic Jews, that is, Jews that worship Jewish, racially Jewish, but practice culturally as Greeks. And then there were, of course, Gentiles there too. It had been a strong Jewish center since the Maccabean times, which is a couple hundred years before Jesus. It also had been a region of strong Jewish resistance activities against the Assyrians initially, and the Roman rule. And much resettlement had been forced on the people in this area, both moving them out and moving Gentiles in. So the headquarters for the Roman army was located there at Caesarea, at the northern end of this, for good reasons, because there was a lot of potential trouble there. But these two miracles involve people of Jewish backgrounds, not Gentiles. So in Acts storyline, which will be big in Gentiles here very soon, it's not happening yet. This is still conversion of Jews to Christianity. The first is a Palestinian Jewish male named Aeneas, but that is a very Greek name, named after a famous pagan warrior. So we can assume that this Jew is Hellenized. That is, he's accepted Greek culture and his Greek name is used. But since he is identified by Luke as a saint, he is therefore converted to Christianity, and he's a faithful Christian, but he's come in from Judaism. Scholars point out that in both these miracle stories, the person is named. Some suggest maybe he is named to show that Peter is now working with these Hellenistic Jews also. They're included, and not just Judean Jews, which initially appeared to be the case. They say, note that carefully that Luke's wording here, Jesus Christ makes you well. Peter is not taking credit for the healing, but removing himself, as Dr. Robert Wall notes, as the broker of the healing work that's being done. He's just the broker. The healing is instant, by the way, appears in this story, although a large crowd is not there to witness this. Or at least it's not mentioned if it was. Aeneas himself seems to be a significant agent in helping spread the results, the examples of this result of this healing. After all, there's significant conversion noted here in the region following this. They see this man walking, and after all, he'd been paralyzed 8 years. They know this. Such would have been a very powerful message, a powerful testimony, scholars note. Dr. William Willimon In his commentary notes that literally Luke is trying to proclaim that Peter goes here and there, proclaiming the gospel with great results, aided through the Holy Spirit. People are healed both physically and spiritually. The results become the witness itself of what Christ is and can do. That result, that witness, is what turns neighbors to the Lord. Proof is in the pudding, notes Dr. Fred Craddock, and the proof is here. A man that's been paralyzed for 8 years gets up and walks and helps spread the word. Thus, Willimon adds, Luke just dropped Peter back into this narrative with results for which he provides very little introduction or details. But they are adding data, he says, to Luke's overall storyline without becoming the storyline themselves. That's the way Willimon sees what's going on here. Dr. Carl Holliday at Emory teaches it seems from the story so far that Peter's formula is, Jesus Christ makes you well, even though he has ascended already to heaven, because he has left the power with his disciples and especially with the apostles through the Holy Spirit. In verses 36 through 43, the miracle story shifts to a female disciple named Tabitha. That's the Aramaic name, or Dorcas in the Greek. And notice here she's referred to as the name gets repeated under the Greek name. So she too is Hellenized. This is the only place in Acts where Luke explicitly identifies a disciple by using the Greek feminine noun for disciple. That's noted by several scholars. Moreover, nowhere else in the New Testament is that female noun or female gender noun for disciple used. Elsewhere, if females are involved, they're just included as part of the group. Why he's doing this here, why Luke does it here and nowhere else, and nowhere else do the others writing in the New Testament use it, gets little discussion by the scholars. So this might make an area for good discussion in our open session. Scholars note the way Luke pins this storyline likely reflects changes that had occurred, though maybe after the story actually occurred, because evidence indicates that this issue of organizing these women into formal groups to serve was later. It would have been active during Luke's time, but there's no evidence, he says, that it was there earlier. Dr. Eugene Boring notes that widows are being organized into charitable service work groups by Luke's time, however. Scholars suggest it is likely that type of group, though, is what is here caring for Tabitha. That's the idea that's left. Whether it really happened, that's the way Luke sees it happening as he envisions what he's been told. But we have to recognize in reality that widows, especially women, but especially widows, have cared for the dead in many cultures throughout history. And this was happening long ago. Scholars note that Luke here in both stories names the individual in the miracle. That's not normal. Such only occurs occasionally elsewhere in the New Testament. Most of the time the person healed is unnamed. Their condition is cited, but so they're known as the paralytic from some town or whatever. In both of these stories, Luke has the apostles essentially duplicating Jesus' miracles. For example, the healing of a paralytic named Aeneas here, and the raising of the dead in the case of Tabitha, as these are the same type miracles that Jesus performed. As in all miracle stories, all the key elements are here in these stories. The person, in these cases, their malady is existed, plus their name, specific name. The healer arrives. The healer performs whatever action and or prayers that are involved, and the individual demonstrates healing in the presence of witnesses. Its impact then is on the community in the form of conversion or followers understanding and changing their paradigm is then presented. Interestingly, Peter puts all the saints and widows outside during the story as he prays. Then he turns to the body, scholars note, meaning that he had turned away, apparently, while he was praying. Facing the body, then he gives the command, in this case, Tabitha, get up. After she responds, he helps her up and calls the witnesses. None of the scholars I consulted added any interpretation as to why he would have dismissed those people from the room. That why would also make a good discussion during our open time. Some scholars do comment concerning this Hellenized Jewish widow here in this miracle. One point raised is as well as the Hellenization of the Hellenized Jew in the previous miracle, because that if Peter was the one who was accused of not caring for the widows, these Hellenized widows that had joined the church back there earlier in Acts. And he then established, or the apostles established, then a group which included Stephen and Philip, along with 5 others, to provide, and these would have been Hellenized men, Hellenized Jewish men that had become Christians, to then handle this deacon duty, if you will. So some suggest Luke is going to an extra length here to make the point that Tabitha is a Hellenistic Jew, also by giving her Jewish and Greek name, which by the way meant gazelle in both languages. Luke seems to be making the point that the apostles are now accepting Hellenized Jewish Christians on equal terms with the Judean Jewish Christians, without making a big point. In other words, by giving these examples and you carefully sorting through them, you then realize that, rather than him making a big statement to that effect. These widows would have been at the lowest rung on the social ladder at the time. Luke is making the point here that says Dr. William Willimon, that Peter and Jesus Christ treat them as equal in the community now. Those who have little or no hope in society are now restored to life in the Christian community. That's the metaphoric message that's there. The duty to care for them as equals is not secondary, but is now primary. Note he teaches that when Peter was made aware of this need to address these people, he took it at the highest value. He did it. He led the apostles. In other words, he is the lead apostle, does the work. He doesn't delegate it to somebody else. That's big, because now Peter, as an apostle, is serving Christians that come from the Hellenistic Jewish community and not just from the Judean Jewish community. Luke closes this chapter with Peter staying in Joppa a while with Simon the tanner. Some scholars make a point. That simple little sentence there has context, he says, in that a tanner was considered non-kosher by a number of sects of Judaism. So this is part of what's happening here. This whole thing that's going to develop in the Jewish Christian community, moving into accepting Gentiles in, that will become a major part of the story of Acts. It's sort of introduced here in that things are changing, in that Peter, coming from a Judean Jewish background, would normally not have been there, but his paradigm has changed. He would not have been associated with a tanner because of kosher laws. But here he is, staying for a significant period of time in a non-kosher household. Hope this gives you some idea how the scholars look at these verses and these two miracles as we finish up this part and begin to move into essentially what will become then the Gentile entry into the Christian movement as we move into chapter 10. Hope you have a good lesson. We'll see you in another one.